Have you ever thought that God might ask you for exactly what you don't have? I'm not talking about a symbolic gesture or a feel-good moment. I mean real obedience, when the little you have is literally all you've got left. It sounds crazy, I know, but sometimes a miracle comes disguised as a test. And that's how everything started to turn around in my life. My name is Josephine Stone. I'm 37 years old. I live in Columbus, Georgia, and I'm a single mom to Claire, my sweet 8-year-old girl. I've done a little bit of everything in life, but that week, all I could do was crunch numbers, and none of them added up. I had a single dollar in my wallet and one impossible choice: use it to buy a snack for my daughter, or obey what I felt during that night's church service. Yes, God asked me for that dollar, and I cried as I gave it. But what happened the very next day? No one in my situation could have seen it coming. I got a phone call with a job offer that changed everything. 10 times more than I ever dreamed of. Does it sound impossible? It is. But that's exactly why you need to hear what happened next. That week, every time I looked in my wallet, all I saw was a crumpled dollar bill, almost like a silent reminder of how tight things really were. Rent was already overdue, and the stack of bills on the living room table seemed to grow every time I took a deep breath. And then there was Claire's lunchbox, something I tried to keep decent, even when all I could pack was bread with butter and watered-down juice. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fear of not being able to take care of what God had entrusted to me. And as strange as it sounds, that dark, hopeless place is exactly where my financial miracle began. A lot of people think a breakthrough starts with something beautiful, a clear sign, an open door you can see. But for me, it started in silence. The kind of silence only someone who's caught between faith and overdue bills can really understand. I didn't cry in front of Claire anymore. She was just a little girl. But at night, after she fell asleep, I'd break down at the foot of my bed. Every tear carried a prayer I couldn't put into words. Because even with everything falling apart, I was still trying to obey God, still believing He could do something. I just had no idea what or how. The hardest part? Pretending to be strong for everyone else, while inside I just wanted to scream. But I learned that there's a kind of strength that doesn't come from us, it comes from faith. And it was that faith, tested in the valley, that held me together. I've heard people say that God is never early, but He's never late either. What I didn't know then was that He was already working out the details behind the scenes. And let me tell you, when God starts moving in the background, you don't always notice it at first, but everything starts to shift, even if on the outside, all you've still got is a single dollar in your pocket. Sunday came, and I'll be honest, I almost didn't go to church. I was exhausted, ashamed, and carrying a heart so heavy, it felt hard to breathe. But something inside me kept saying, go anyway. So I did. I sat near the back with Claire by my side, trying to blend in behind the other faces. Worship started softly, but somehow every lyric cut through the things I'd been trying to hide. God's presence was so real, so tangible, that my already cracked heart began to fully break. When Pastor Rick stepped up to preach, he didn't say a word about money. He talked about trust, about obeying God even when everything inside you wants to do the opposite. And that's when I felt it. I can't explain how, but I just knew God was asking me to give that $1. It was like the Holy Spirit whispered, do you trust me with everything, even the little bit you have? And in that moment, I understood what it means to be confronted by a love that doesn't force, but invites. I knew what I had to do, but I'll be honest, my heart wasn't ready. You know that feeling when something is so small, yet feels enormous because of the emotional weight behind it? That was exactly it. It wasn't about the dollar's value, it was about what it meant to me in that moment. It represented safety, even if just a little. It was Claire's snack money. And yet, it was like God was gently teaching me that when we place even our little in His hands, He multiplies it. But sitting there in that pew, watching the offering plate slowly make its way toward me, all I felt was fear. A fear that for some reason didn't stop me from standing up. When the offering plate reached my row, I held onto that dollar for a few extra seconds. It felt like forever. I remember Claire looking up at me, not really understanding what was going on, and I just gave her a teary smile. Putting that dollar in was like tearing away a piece of my pride, my need to be in control. My heart was screaming, "What if we don't have enough tomorrow?" But my soul whispered louder, "Just obey." And I did, with trembling hands, with watery eyes, but I obeyed. It was a small act, but it carried the weight of a spiritual battle. Not everyone understands what it means to give during a season of lack. Some people think it's foolish. And honestly, if I were looking through natural eyes, maybe I would have thought the same. But anyone who truly knows the God I serve knows He tests hearts, not wallets. I wasn't trying to buy a blessing. I was choosing to trust. It was like saying, "Okay, Lord, even if I don't understand, I choose to believe." And that simple moment, that was a financial miracle in the making. One step of obedience that begins to open invisible doors. On the drive home, I cried, but it was a different kind of cry. It wasn't just sadness or fear, it was deep surrender. The kind that comes when you know you've just given up something precious. Claire was asleep in the back seat, and as I drove through the city, all I could think was, "Lord, I did what you asked. Now please help me." There were no visible promises, no guarantees on the horizon, but something had shifted inside me. There was peace, relief, like God was saying, "Now let me take care of it." That night, as I made the simplest dinner of the week, rice with eggs and the last bit of veggies, the question circling my mind was this: was it faith or was it just foolishness? Claire, in all her innocence, smiled and thanked me for the food. And that broke me, because deep down, I knew I could have used that dollar to buy her something more. It's a question most people are afraid to say out loud. How far does obedience to God go when there's hunger inside your own home? And let me tell you, that question tore me up inside. I sat on the couch for a long time, with the TV on just to fill the silence. And there, between the commercials and the overdue bills scattered across the table, I started to realize something. Real faith isn't comfortable. It forces you to confront what you value more: control or trust. A lot of people say they trust God, but in reality, they hold on tight to the little they have, afraid to let go. And I get it. It's human. But right there, hungry in every way, emotionally and physically, I began to learn what it actually means to live by faith, not just talk about it. You know that verse, "The righteous will live by faith"? I thought I understood it until that day. Because living by faith is giving your last, not knowing where the next will come from. It's knocking on doors that still won't open. It's praying even when you have no strength left. And that's exactly where I was. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't comfortable, but it was real. And deep down, even through the tears, something inside me kept saying, if you're walking through this, it's because God is about to show you something you could only see through hunger. That night, sleep just wouldn't come. My pillow was soaked, not just with tears, but with the weight I was carrying. Doubt, exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that goes way beyond the physical. I got up slowly, careful not to wake Claire, and walked into the living room. I knelt down on the thin carpet and whispered what my voice couldn't bring itself to say out loud. Lord, if there's still something left for me, show me. It wasn't a pretty prayer. There were no memorized Bible verses, just a tired, broken mom trying to obey God even when none of it made sense. I stayed there for over an hour, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tears, and sometimes just repeating, I trust you. That night, I realized that the most powerful prayers aren't the polished ones, they're the honest ones. It was on that cold floor that I laid down my pride, my logic, and my need to stay in control. I told God that if that dollar was truly a step of faith, then He would have to be the provider, because I had nothing left to give. It was rock bottom, yes, but it was also the exact place where light tends to start breaking through. I remember finishing that prayer with a kind of peace that didn't make any sense. Not because the bills had disappeared, they were still there. Not because the financial breakthrough had come, it hadn't. But something in my heart just knew. God had heard me. That prayer, as simple as it was, had reached heaven. It was a night of battle, but also of surrender. And little did I know, just a few hours later, God would begin to respond in a way I never could have imagined, not even in my best dreams. I woke up that morning with my eyes still swollen from the night of prayer. I made breakfast with the little I had, and before waking Claire up, I just stood there by the kitchen window, trying to make sense of everything I was feeling. That's when the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but something inside me whispered, "Pick it up." And when I heard the voice on the other end say, "Good morning, this is Raymond Carter," I nearly dropped the phone. I hadn't heard that name in years. Raymond Carter was a Christian businessman, known for supporting local social projects. We had worked together briefly on a transcription project a while back. I remembered him being polite, but I never imagined he even remembered my name. He said he had been going through some old files and was reminded of how professional I was. Then he told me a new position had opened up on a project he was launching and that I was the first person who came to mind. "Would you be available to come in tomorrow to talk about it?" he asked. And right then I knew heaven was moving. I hung up the phone and sat down on the kitchen floor, still holding it in my hand. A testimony of breakthrough was starting to unfold right in front of my eyes. It wasn't the paycheck yet. It wasn't a signed contract, but it was the first open door in a very long time. It felt like God was saying, "I heard you, and I've already started answering." And it all started with obedience, with $1, with a night of surrender. My heart was still racing, but the fear, it was finally starting to lose its grip. Raymond Carter was one of those names you hear from time to time, but never expect to actually call you one day. A well-respected businessman in Columbus, known for his community involvement and for a quiet but unwavering faith. I met him about 3 years ago when I took on a one-time audio transcription project for a conference he was organizing. It was a simple, short-term job, but I gave it my best because I've always believed that even in the little things, we should give our all. That's where obedience to God is tested, when no one's watching. I remember he paid me early and even sent a thank you email, appreciating the attention to detail. We hadn't spoken since, but look how God works. Years later, in a moment when I had absolutely nothing, that small project came back, not just as a seed, but as a harvest. When people talk about financial miracles, most imagine money falling from the sky, but sometimes the miracle is a memory, one that God brings to the right heart at exactly the right time. The truth is, God prepares connections long before you ever know you'll need them. And Raymond was exactly that, an old, quiet, forgotten connection used by God in the perfect moment. That's when I began to understand nothing we do with faith and integrity is ever wasted. What once seemed like just a side gig was now becoming a bridge to something greater. And inside me, an expectation began to rise. Because if God had pulled Raymond's name out of a drawer, what else was he getting ready to reveal? As I got ready for the interview with Raymond, I started thinking about everything that had happened over the past few days. And that's when it hit me. God had already been moving the pieces long before that church service. I thought the story started when I gave that $1, but it didn't. God had been working behind the scenes for a while, through old conversations, forgotten gestures, and even silences that once felt like closed doors. And realizing that shook me in the best way. You know those moments when it feels like God is silent? More often than not, he's actually preparing the way. He's positioning people, connecting opportunities, softening hearts. But we, in our impatience, want everything to be visible and immediate. The thing is, God's kingdom doesn't run on our timeline. It runs on the timeline of maturity. That little project with Raymond, at the time it felt insignificant, but now I see it was where God planted a key I wouldn't have been ready to use until now. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. What seems small can be the beginning of a breakthrough story. That simple job, God used it as a reference. That act of excellence, God saw it. That quiet obedience when no one was watching, God recorded it. Nothing is wasted. That's why now, anytime something feels pointless, I stop and ask myself, what if this is God setting something in motion that I'll only understand later? Because when heaven starts to move, everything begins to make sense in a new way. The interview was simple, almost casual. Raymond welcomed me with a warm smile, the kind that brings peace the moment you walk into the room. We talked about the position, but also about faith, family, and values. At one point, he said, "Josephine, I need someone I can trust, and God brought your name to my heart." I swallowed hard. I didn't even know what to say. When he showed me the offer, my eyes filled with tears. It was 10 times more than I expected, plus benefits, flexibility, and dignity. I had to ask for a minute to catch my breath. You know that moment when you're trying to look professional, but inside you're falling apart? That was me. Not because it was a lot of money, but because I knew what that moment meant. It was the result of tested faith, of obedience that came with tears. It was the answer from a God who saw me kneeling on the carpet in the middle of the night and chose to open doors no one else could open. It was a financial miracle, with a name, a letterhead, and a start date. I signed the contract with trembling hands, but with a steady heart. And on the way home, the world looked completely different. The sky was the same, the streets were the same, but inside me, everything had changed. This wasn't just a new job. It was a new season, a new chapter being written. And deep down, I knew. This offer wasn't the end of the struggle. It was just the beginning of something greater. Because when God moves, he doesn't just fix things, he transforms them. As soon as I got home with the signed offer in my bag, the first thing I did was drop everything on the couch and fall to my knees on the living room rug. It felt like all the weight from the past few months just rolled off my back. I didn't cry out loud. I just stayed there, forehead to the floor, whispering my thanks. That's when I felt Claire's little hand on my shoulder. She stood quietly next to me, curious, not saying a word. Then she whispered, "Mommy, are you sad or happy?" I looked at her, eyes still full of tears, and said, "Very happy, sweetheart. God helped Mommy." She smiled and sat down on the floor with me. That simple moment left a mark on me. Because in that instant, my daughter didn't see a strong woman or some unstoppable warrior. She saw someone who kneels when victory comes. And to me, that's worth more than any title. Teaching Claire about faith with words is good, but showing her with my life, 1,000 times better.
The following week, with the first advance from my new job, I went grocery shopping with Claire. For the first time in months, I didn't have to do the math before picking up the milk. She picked out her favorite snack with a smile that absolutely wrecked me inside. It wasn't just about food. It was about dignity being restored, about looking at that cart and realizing that God didn't just cover the essentials, He cared about the details. It was like the bread being multiplied in the Bible, except this time it was in my own kitchen cabinet. I keep thinking about how intentional God is. He could have just helped me pay off my debts, but He went further. He gave me a steady job. He gave me my confidence back. He let me provide for my daughter, not just what she needed, but even a bit of what she wanted. And you know what amazes me? I didn't have to compromise my faith to get any of it. I didn't have to play dirty or make deals that went against my values. It was a financial miracle built on obedience. And that's the kind of foundation that holds. That's when I started to understand. God's provision isn't just about filling in the gaps. It's about teaching us principles. Because the God who multiplies bread also teaches us not to waste it. What used to be desperation became planning. I started tracking my expenses, building a savings buffer, and even helping others quietly along the way. And it's funny how once lack is gone, gratitude turns into action. Because those who've gone hungry never forget the taste of bread. And those who've seen a miracle know. They're called to share it. Sharon may never know how much she meant to me during that time. She didn't know the details. I never told her about the dollar in my wallet or the empty fridge. But every night, she would send me a simple message. "Want to pray?" Sometimes I wanted to say no. I was exhausted, out of faith, just wanting to hide. But every time we prayed together, whether on a call or through a voice message, I felt my strength slowly coming back. It was like she was holding my arm as I was sinking, whispering, "You're not going down alone." Some people think Christian friendship is just about small talk and Sundays at church, but Sharon went further. She was my intercessor without even knowing it, my battle buddy. She never pressured me to explain, never asked for details. She just showed up. And you know what's beautiful? Even without knowing about my financial struggle, she always prayed for open doors. She would say things like, "God's going to surprise you this week." And inside, I'd be crying because it felt like heaven was using her as a confirmation. Looking back now, I see that God never leaves us alone. He sends people who are sensitive to the Spirit, people who pray with you even if they don't fully understand what you're going through. And if you have someone like that, hold on to them. And if you don't, be that person for someone else. Because financial miracles often come through relationships. Our obedience to God grows stronger when someone's right beside us reminding us, don't stop believing. On my first day of work, I chose a simple outfit, but with the kind of care that comes from someone who knows the value of a fresh start. My heart was beating fast, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. I walked into the office with my head held high, but with my heart still bowed in prayer. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and I knew I couldn't let excitement replace my dependence on God. I wasn't just after a paycheck. I wanted purpose. I wanted to live this new season as an extension of my faith, not just an escape from scarcity. Every little detail reminded me of where I came from. The new badge, the modern computer, the comfy chair. It all stood in sharp contrast to the sleepless nights, the prayers on a cold floor, the barely enough bread. But instead of trying to forget, I chose to remember. Because when you forget the valley, you lose humility on the mountain. And I made a silent vow during that first coffee break in the office kitchen. Lord, may everything I do here bring you glory. Don't let me lose my focus. That was my new beginning, rooted deep. I approached my coworkers with kindness, but without trying too hard, just letting the light shine naturally. And little by little, they started to notice something different. It wasn't about being religious, It was about having peace. And deep down, I knew God didn't put me there just to pay the bills. He put me there to be an answer. Because sometimes open doors aren't just for you to walk through, they're for you to bring others with you. What felt like a financial miracle for me might just become a living message for them.
It didn't take long for me to realize that this job wasn't just a blessing, it was also a mission. I didn't want to just be a good employee, I wanted to be faithful. In those first few days, while I was still learning the ropes and getting used to everything, I would quietly pray at my desk. Lord, give me wisdom to go above and beyond. Help me to be excellent, not to show off, but to honor you. And you know what happened? People started to notice. Not because I was talking about God, but because I worked like someone who serves Him. Raymond Carter, my new boss, called me into his office after my first week. He said, "There's something different about you. It's like you're always one step ahead, but with humility." I smiled and replied honestly, "I used to work just to survive. Now I work to show gratitude." He got it. And in that moment, I realized my attitude was planting seeds. I didn't have to preach with words. My actions were speaking loud enough. Every task done with care, every respectful response, it was like silent worship. Over time, coworkers started coming to me to talk, ask for advice, even open up about personal things. One of them said, "You bring peace to this place." And I thought, that's the Holy Spirit. I didn't come here alone. Honoring God at work isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest, available, and generous. And I understood something. Even in a modern office, surrounded by spreadsheets and reports, I was still the church, still a light. Because God's favor doesn't end when we receive it. It multiplies when we give it back in the form of service. A few weeks after I started my new job, I went back to that same Sunday service where it had all begun. I sat in the same seat, but my heart was completely different. Back then, I had $1 in my pocket and a silent desperation in my chest. Now, I had a job, renewed hope, and a story still burning inside me. When Pastor Rick stepped up to the pulpit, it seemed like he didn't even remember the message he had preached that hard night. But God did. That day, he spoke about silent obedience, about how sometimes God tests our hearts when no one's watching. And as he preached, my eyes filled with tears, because he had no idea, but he was describing exactly what had happened to me. It was like heaven was whispering, "I heard, I saw, I remembered." Pastor Rick didn't know that an old sermon of his had been the spark that pushed me to take a step of faith. And now, without knowing it, he was confirming that it hadn't been in vain. After the service, I wanted to thank him, but something held me back. Maybe because I knew the gravest way to say thank you was to keep living out my faith with courage. The answer wasn't just for me. It was for anyone still struggling to believe, for anyone torn between fear and faith. And that Sunday, I realized something deep. Sometimes the preacher doesn't even know it, but he's being the voice of God. And sometimes we don't even realize it, but we're becoming someone's answered prayer. Over time, I realized that the service, that single dollar, that small act, had nothing to do with money. God didn't need my last dollar. He wanted my whole heart. It was like heaven was asking me, "Do you trust me even when you don't understand, even when you have nothing?" And that offering, which seemed so small, ended up unlocking one of the biggest lessons of my life. Real faith isn't measured by how much we have, but by how fully we're willing to surrender, even in the dark. I remember crying that night, thinking I was giving up something valuable. But now I see I didn't lose anything. I gained everything. Because that offering became the starting point of a whole new journey. God used a simple act to break a deep fear inside me, the fear of lack, the fear of trusting, the fear of being let down. But when I gave that dollar, I also gave up my fears, my logic, my need to be in control. And that's when God truly began to move. I had always heard that God looks at the heart, but now I finally understood what that meant. He was showing me that what touches heaven isn't the amount we give, it's the depth of our surrender. Because when I gave that dollar, what I was really saying without any words was, Lord, I have nothing, but I still have you. And that was enough. It wasn't about a test. It was about transformation. God wasn't trying to take something from me. He was trying to give me something greater, a fully surrendered heart. Days went by, and with the new job came a stability I hadn't felt in years. The bills were paid on time, the pantry was full, and I even managed to buy Claire a new bike. But not once did I let my heart be fooled by the false sense of security that money can bring. Every time I receive my paycheck, I remember that morning when I looked into my wallet and saw just $1. And every time I return my tithe or bless someone else, I do it with joy because I know how much it cost to trust. I still sit in the same pew at church. I still pray with Sharon on Thursdays. I still teach my daughter to trust God in everything. Because even though life looks different on the outside, I refuse to forget where I came from on the inside. The desert taught me lessons that the palace never could. And I don't want to just remember the miracles. I want to live in a way that my life responds to them, not just with words, but with actions that honor God's faithfulness. Some people, when they finally overcome, try to erase the marks of the struggle. Not me. I keep every memory like an altar, a place I return to remind myself it was God, only God. And if I have more today than I did yesterday, that's exactly why I need to keep giving, serving, and helping, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Because when I remember where I came from, my heart bows down. And when my heart bows down, God continues to be glorified. Today, looking back, I understand that $1 was just the beginning of a journey of trust. Because if I was able to trust God when I had so little, now that I have more, I trust Him even more deeply. Not because it's easier, but because I've seen what He can do when all you have is faith. And if He was faithful when I had nothing, why would I ever doubt Him now that I have something in my hands? I know there are people listening to my story who might be right there, at the end of their resources, at rock bottom, at their last breath before giving up. And if that's you, I want to share something that I carry in my heart. God doesn't need much to perform a miracle. He just needs our yes. And sometimes that yes comes in the form of a whispered prayer, a genuine tear, or a single dollar given in faith. If you can trust God with the little, you're making room for Him to do so much more. Because heaven doesn't respond to the amount, it responds to surrender. And that's what changed my life. Today, I live with more, but I still depend on the same God. Because trust isn't just something we do in a crisis. Trust is a way of life. And if I had to go back to that church service with $1 in my hand and fear in my chest, I would give it all over again. Because I've learned that when we give everything, God gives even more.